I didn't want to wreck him. It just I had to stay on the track, and he didn't give me any room. It just, we both collided. That's the only thing I feel bad about. I'm more upset with Greg Biffle. He's the most unprofessional little scaredy cat I've ever seen in my life. He wouldn't even fight me like a man after. He needs a freaking whooping. I'm going to give it to him.
Good day, race fans, and welcome to the Intentional Wreck Podcast, the podcast made by race fans for race fans, from the casuals to the lifelong gearheads. My name is Jeff, and I'm here with just Finn today. Corey is out and taking a little break. He's on vacation, so he'll be back with us on the next episode, but it's just going to be the two of us for this one. But you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and iHeartRadio under the name Intentional Wreck. You can also find us on Twitter and TikTok under the handle @IntWreckPod. That's @INTWRECKPOD. So we got 3 races to go over today, Finn. A couple of interesting subjects relating to those, considering we had same old with Martinsville. We actually had excitement at Texas. We've got another crazy thing that we haven't seen in a long time in Chase Elliott pulling a win. And we had DEGA, which, we had probably 85% of a regular DEGA race. And then we had a few important key moments to go over that intended to make it a little more interesting. How you doing today?
I'm good, man. Definitely missing Corey within these conversations. It's always good. Kind of the point of the pod is for us to all talk racing, so he'll be missed. What won't be missed this weekend, we'll talk about it, the race itself, but the rain. You guys aren't going to Dover for the first time in 2 straight years, and it's the first time that it's not rained. I always get so mad about this race, but no, we are through what I would say is the most boring part of the schedule. Martinsville, Texas, and DEGA, all 3, we left those races with a sense of wanting more. Were they all as bad as like the worst race we've ever seen there? No, not necessarily. There were some highlights to those weekends. I want to point out, since we kind of mainly cover the Cup Series, there was a fantastic finish at Texas as Ryan Sieg, a small team guy, doesn't have a win. In fact, I think he's got like 300 starts in Xfinity. He gets the best tires in the field in a late restart, and he is flying through, takes the lead. Then there's a caution. Then they rack him back up, go again, and he's out by like a second and a half. So close for a huge win for a small team, a guy like him. That's the bread and butter of this series. Of NASCAR is the small teams that go out there and they go out there to finish 10th. You know what I'm saying? We highlight all the time the top 10, the guys that win these races, but these guys go out there. That's everything. A top 10 might be the difference between gaining a new sponsor, and he's about to get a win. And then Sam Mayer plays villain here, runs him down, and in the final corner is able to catch him and pass him as they're beating door to door for like one of the closest finishes in Xfinity history. It was a really good race. Really wish for the culture of the sport for Ryan to win, but Sam had been struggling all year long. Sam Mayer, the one kind of a young junior motorsports prospect, so there was that to watch. Martinsville is Martinsville. I don't understand, Jeff, why everybody says bring the Bristol tire. They don't realize it wasn't a different tire from the last time we went to Bristol. The track didn't take the rubber. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they could have brought the same tire and it laid rubber, and then we got a boring race. I don't know how you could force a track to not take rubber, but that's what has to do. It's not just like bring the shitty tire that didn't lay rubber, because you can get the Martinsville and it lays rubber down, and
it's going to look different on a different track. I mean, right. Naturally, you're going to run into a certain... Bristol runs the way that it does for a reason. The way that it's shaped, the way that it's inclined, the way that it's designed. It's the tiny super speedway, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's take the aspects of the super speedway and shrink it down into a short track, and you've kind of got what Bristol's aimed to be. And you can't just take that and translate it to a flat track like Martinsville and expect to get the same results, just in the same way that we've seen on the 1.5 miles. You haven't seen some of the same excitement that you've seen at Kansas or that you've seen at Charlotte or that you've seen at other tracks like that at, say, Gateway.
Right.
It's not to knock it. I mean, we're still, blooming at that track as far as like figuring out what's going to make exciting races there, but it doesn't match up. We'd be crazy to say it matches up with some of the same mile and a halfs over the last few years with this generation of car.
Mhm.
So yeah, you're right. You can't just take the exact same tire and just throw it out on this track and just expect that to be your end all be all solution. Martinsville's had a problem for a while now.
Right. And I don't know what we're gonna do. I will say this: I've gone back and watched about 2 races a week. I just will get on YouTube, pick a year between 2001 to 2018. It's probably normally the cutoff. And then I just watch whatever track. And I tell you this: going back and watching those old Martinsville races really makes you understand like why it's a core foundation of the sport, and that will help people understand the frustration as to like why it is where it is. It used to be people generally could find speed on the outside lane, or you could move people. And we don't want to rehash the same conversations that Denny and all those guys have already had on their podcast weeks ago, right? Smartinsville's weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we'll, but really at the end of the day, it seems like for the first time in a long time, there's a loud majority of people that don't like the product, and now they're speaking out about it. I don't know what that means, but what I will say this is in the past, it's like a guy gets mad, but it's like Kyle Busch is mad, and everybody goes, "Oh, Kyle's already mad." Everybody's mad. Um,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
platforms play a role too, right? This is the
right,
first time
right,
you've had situations where you've got so many people with this many ears
right,
on a weekly basis. It kind of used to be, you think about like in the early 2000s, right? Like in the pre or very early social media days when there were plenty of drivers that weren't on social media so much and weren't really even saying much, but the only real thing that you had was what was put out on your pre and post race show and what you saw on maybe the 30 minutes to an hour of NASCAR content you might get in the middle of that week, and all of that's curated to whatever the network decides to put out at the time. And now you've got Denny's podcast that's been successful. You got other podcasts like Door Bumper Clear, which is spotters and people that are directly related to what's going on. You've got the Teardown. You had, publications that you can read, but right now you've never had such a direct platform for drivers and people that are actually racing to be able to express this kind of stuff, which has also spawned a lot of the discussions that we have now about people have said NASCAR has a personality problem,
right.
which I can understand in a lot of ways. But it expands on that, right? We're in a new era right now that we may actually see. We know for a fact that NASCAR officials are listening to this stuff. We
Right.
know for a fact that the message gets out there. We'll just see what it actually translates to. It may take a while.
Right. And yeah, there's a ton of things you have to do. Again, we've talked extensively about like the iRacing and the game coming out. If if you want, I mean, I will say this as a person who was never a baseball fan. Ignore that thing in the background. That's from my childhood. I was never a baseball fan. Then the MLB The Show game comes over to Xbox, and all of a sudden, I'm just knee deep in baseball. I'm learning all these players. I'm learning about it. It opens so many doors and
Yeah.
interesting video games. So that's a way that NASCAR is kind of trending in the right direction by giving iRacing that title. Um, and then turning around and yes, the Netflix docu series was fantastic. All the podcast, all the sanctioned podcast. I mean,
Yep.
we've got Lola Joy stacking pennies, so you get a driver on a smaller medium tier
Harvick
input.
happy hour.
The Harvick happy hour, which it's got its bumps. They've got to figure out what they're doing, but Kevin Harvick has got a ton of
It's kind of
stories,
corporate, but yeah.
shares them. That you've got a podcast of Dale Jr., who's like the historian of the official spokesperson of the sport. You've got Door Bumper Clear, where you're getting a little bit more unfiltered. They had Jesse Love on this week after he won his first race. We'll talk about that at DEGA. But that's a little bit more unfiltered and more access into this. I love it, and they need to keep pushing that. And one of the things I just think has to catch up is NASCAR's fan base, because you mentioned, public persona, corporate NASCAR people want sponsors, and as you speak out and you try to learn about the personality. When you learn the personality of drivers, you start to learn there's as many good things as you learn bad things, right? You start speaking, and the more you talk to people, and the more you start realizing, oh, I kind of get an idea of their political leanings now.
Yeah.
As you start getting, as podcasts grow, because eventually going to stop talking about the sport, and things are going to come up and pop. And you NASCAR obviously has a very, I mean, just look at what happened with the Confederate flag. There's obviously a huge divide and history of the kind of people that are fans of NASCAR, what their political leanings are, what their religious leanings are. And I've always tell people this, again, not to dive too deep into this whole NASCAR fans tend to be from the South. NASCAR drivers tend to be from everywhere else.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And yes,
Yeah.
you got a couple of guys that are from the South, right? But I'll name a driver from Alabama, not really liked by NASCAR fans, Bubba Wallace, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Harvick, California, Gordon, Indiana, Stewart, Indiana, Jimmy, California, is all over the place, and so there always is this dynamic. So NASCAR's done a good job at kind of modernizing the feel and the presentation, and allowing the drivers a way to do it. And I think that'll help as getting back to our main point, allowing people to speak out more.
Yeah.
And because we are in such a, I mean, seriously, a Jordan brand car just won a NASCAR race. I don't think we realize how, like, with Jordan on, and it's not the first time, right? Kurt has won in the Jordan scheme car and whatever, but for that to be a thing, to see Jordan to the Jumpman logo in Victory Lane in NASCAR is so cool to me. Like, it's not a crossover I ever expected.
Michael Jordan carried Tyler Reddick's kid to Victory Lane with as amazing as that was, right? Like I was watching, that was so wholesome and awesome and just in general. But to the initial point that you were making though is like, like right now we're seeing like it's led more eyes to the sport, but it's opening the sport up to so many more new things. The Jordan car getting wins and being in Victory Lane with a Jumpman logo up on the top is an example of something that 10 15 years ago you would have never seen. That would not have been something that you would have gotten. Pitbull owning a racing team is not something that you would have had anywhere near your radar for something that you were going to tie in with NASCAR. But here we are, and it's good for the sport. Whether that's going to frustrate some people, and that kind of is what it is. It's good for the sport, so you're gonna have to deal with it. It just kind of is what it is, right?
Right. In the modernization, I want to talk a little bit about like the schemes. Like seriously, like track. You mentioned Trackhouse. Trackhouse schemes beautiful every week. Bubba, they just dropped. Did you see the Air Force scheme? They brought back the Warthog car. It looks fantastic with the Air Force sponsorship and the front. Like I'll probably throw it up here. That's fantastic.
That's coming from a Navy guy. Also, that's the other thing. You have a sailor right now praising something that has to do with the Air Force.
I like a good Air Force scheme. I actually always hated the Navy schemes. I don't like the Navy's colors for a NASCAR car.
You don't like the anchors and stuff?
Well, just blue and yellow feels real stale, and it reminds me of how much I hate Chase Elliott's paint scheme. Like the biggest driver in the sport has the most boring schemes, and Napa sucks. Like the Hooters one's dope. But the Universe ones are okay, mainly because I like their color scheme. But like all the Napa ones, awful every single time. They're awful.
That ties directly into this though, in the fact that like you are seeing a stylistic change to the sport, in that it's not just like every now and then you got some goofy Cartoon Network car out there that's running as a backfiller or something like that, or something like that that's going on. It's like every week a team is trying to put themselves out there on the forefront and make a change with a scheme, or trying to like show a little color, or trying to highlight something. And this brings eyes. And when you bring up sponsors, it's a great point, because at this point, when you can do that, and when you see the social media boost that comes from a lot of these, sponsors are watching that. Potential sponsors are seeing that, and they're like, we look pretty good on that. I wonder what artists like came up with this. We'd look pretty good on that car. We should get our car out there on Sunday.
And
it happens.
And what's cool to add on is the same guy that makes the schemes for these teams makes them on trading paints for iRacing, and he makes some other cool ones. So like, to you immediately to be like, that scheme's cool. It used to be like, well, they'll add it to the game in 5 months as a DLC. No, Get on the
Yeah.
game now and race that scheme.
Hmm.
It's such a cool thing that you don't really get in other sports because of like custom jerseys and stuff. So, but
Yeah. You
Martinsville
get
was
them at the beginning of the year at the
right,
release, and that's it.
right. Martinsville's Martinsville is it sucks. They'll fix it. They'll figure it out
Yeah.
eventually. But like Joey Logano on the left side tires are like 180 laps, like, and nobody could pass them. Like again, been a ton of talk on that. Let's chat to Texas. Again, we talked about the Xfinity race with Ryan Sieg. Chase Elliott, kind of wins. Is able to fight off Denny. Does a good job of squeezing. It's already a tough track to pass. But I'm gonna hop on my soapbox really, really quick. So Jimmy Jam raced his first race since Daytona. Came back and of course he spun out in practice. Didn't even get to qualify because he spun out in practice at the wall. And then brought out one of the first cautions in the race by spinning out. And I want to point out, it's like one of the things a lot of see in a text message I got was, do you think that Jimmy's legacy is bad by him going out there and sucking in these cars? And then second, before the pod started, I get on Reddit and somebody said, and we'll talk about the Eric Jones situation, but it was like, somebody said, oh, Jimmy's blind faith in his abilities won't let him realize he's a liability in this car. And I'm first of all, the same place that Jimmy spun out is where Hamlin spun out, is where Bell spun out. All right. These cars are not built to sit loose at all, to drive off the right rear at all. So all the guys
No.
that drive off the right rear like that, if they hit a bump or it gets slightly out of, you can't catch it like you used to. And we talked about this in the past, how much practice drivers used to get over a weekend.
Yep.
And that's something that I've noticed going back and watching all of these races is, like as they're talking, and another thing too, I've been listening a lot to the broadcast, again, not to get on the anti, but they've got some still some shitty coverage by Fox. But like it used to fill in dead time with a bunch of stories about over the weekend. You unload Thursday, have practice, have qualifying Friday or whatever it was, Saturday's a happy hour practice, final practice. How did you do in your 3 practice sessions of qualifying? How did you make the car better? And there's like this story that they're painting for the driver. It's not just like, and here's Ricky Stenhouse running in 17th. He's up 3 spots since the restart. And then if you're a Ricky Stenhouse fan, that's all you got. It's
Right.
not like
where's the
right,
where's this? Well, it's
right,
also like it's not just that. It's also filler cars. At least somebody can actually like your name is going to get said on TV in those situations,
right,
or you're going to be in situation like because one thing that we see now that's a little different than years ago is that there used to be points where trying to actually like fill a field was a challenge at one point, but it also created storylines and
right,
created a situation where you could do what you're
right,
talking about and actually like, hey, we had this guy who was coming into practice and he came out and he looked really bad. But then over the course of the weekend, all of a sudden he started picking it up and he started getting there. And then by the time qualifying comes around, a car that you thought was going to be sitting back in 30th got to qualify in the top 15.
right,
And here they are giving somebody a run.
right.
That was a lot more interesting in actually building up the story. Now it's kind of the fields are usually full.
Right.
And you generally just get Sunday's story because you don't have that full weekend of practice anymore.
Right. And not only that, you see how many drivers are interested in coming over and trying NASCAR, right? The big thing with Xfinity and SVG and Kamui and all of the, couple other F1 drivers, they call him the Iceman. I'm Kimmy, Raikkonen, Jordan Taylor, all those guys that come over and race in these. Well, if they would have a whole weekend of practice, I think that would improve that. And that's kind of what we're seeing when I see Jimmy go out there. And first of all, Jimmy Johnson could finish 30th every week. I don't care.
No,
Jimmy has from a legacy perspective, Jimmy Johnson not being good at a less horsepower car, a car that every driver on the circuit complains about every week, he just doesn't drive these cars and he gets 20 minutes of practice and then he has to qualify and race. It's not impacted. So stop texting me or asking me or talking shit about Jimmy saying, oh, Jimmy washed. No. Well, Jimmy went to IndyCar. Is IndyCar something that Jimmy can that fits that driving style? No. Jimmy's just earned the right to go, I want to try something new. Let me try something new. I don't care if I suck. I've got the funding. you know?
That's also like we
Right.
talk about going over to other places. To that same point, though, he also went and ran IMSA endurance races, ran the Rolex 24,
Right.
and ran on teams that were
Right.
decent and
And
did it, and he
he's
held his
right.
own.
And he's not a road course racer. Like maybe if
Right.
Jimmy was like, you know what I'm saying? Like if like I would love to see Jimmy like be like, "Oh, let me just go dirt racing on ovals." You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
Jimmy does not have a dirt oval background. And
Yeah.
Jimmy has smoked when they used to have the Tony Stewart used to run like this preseason late model dirt
Yeah.
oval thing at Race for Champions or some I can't remember what it was called, but Jimmy would smoke for them in that. But you know, Jimmy's out there just driving and having fun. So and that's how I'm gonna take it. And but really, I just it's so weird because everybody else is spinning out of Texas, in a very similar location. It's just a weird car. People just kind of lose it. Um,
I am. It makes me very interested to see what happens when we go to Iowa,
right,
because it's like in the recent years, as I've picked up IndyCar more,
right,
that's one of those tracks that tends to get looked forward to on the IndyCar circuit, like most of the time, because of the fact that it's a bumpier track. It's an interesting layout for an oval. It runs. I mean, usually, if I'm not mistaken, that track is one that IndyCar runs 2 days in a row throughout the course of a whole weekend. It's a lot of. It's fun to watch because it makes for some compelling racing, because the actual surface and the texture of the track makes for the way that you actually drive to be different. But to the NASCAR point with that, I'm interested to see how some of these guys that do attempt to drive on the right rear of their car,
right,
or do attempt to try and get a little loose, handle a track that's bumpy like that, or handle a track where the lanes are going to be a little different
right,
than what they might be used to. I think it's going to make for either extremely boring or it's going to make for a hell of an exciting race. So
right,
I'm
right.
kind of psyched for that.
And Denny actually went into detail about driving off the right rear versus driving off the right front, and talking about Jimmy and that transition a ton. So I am in line with that. Denny talked a lot about it on the podcast, so I'm not too concerned about it. He's there for fun, and we'll get probably back into Jimmy because he is going to be racing at Dover this weekend. But all in all, Texas, I'm interested to leave that race with this. All right, so Chase Elliott has got the monkey off his back, right? He's got to win. He's in the playoffs. Now he can just focus on returning to form at where he's good. The road courses, returning to form is just kind of being good. Similar to when Truex went the whole season winless and then he won the Clash. I felt like that was a good point. And then last year we saw Truex kind of return to Truex form, right? Winning a ton of races, being dominant. Well, maybe not winning a ton of races, but leading a lot of laps, continuing to be solid. So, and I think
Competing.
right, and I believe he won this Dover race last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, he did.
Right,
And it was exciting because that was the race where he was chasing down Chastain throughout the majority. I mean, it was
mhm,
such a fun race to be at.
right,
Because I mean, that's essentially Truex home track, right? Like
right,
that's like going to Dover. So whenever I've gone to Richmond, like I'm usually somewhat at home, right? Like you see a lot of Toyota, you do see a lot of 11s, like you see a lot of people generally at Richmond. When you go to Dover, there's a lot of 19s. You
right.
see a lot of the 19s, and you see a lot of Truex gear, and you see a lot of there. And I guess it's regional,
Yep,
because you get
yep,
I get whatever NASCAR fans you're pulling down from that Jersey, Philly area. Because if I remember right, I want to say like I know Truex is from Jersey, but I'm not exactly sure
okay.
like the general area. He doesn't quite have that same southern drawl that some of the other drivers do. You know what I'm
Like I said,
saying? Like, yeah,
like I said before, the fans are from the South, the drivers aren't. So,
yeah,
but for Chase, I think this will be a good. Just get it out of the way. Suarez had that early in the year. I've seen Suarez a little bit more up the front, maybe this year than I did last year. He's not competing for wins. Chastain is still kind of the premier trackhouse car, but I think if I go back there and look at Suarez, we're seeing him run into the teens and be solid. And I just hope that team is just learning and testing out things and throwing things at the wall and at the setups to see what sticks. But that's all I got for Texas. Again, it was okay. I think the Xfinity race showed that it's the car, not the track,
yeah.
in terms of what's wrong with it. But I do think that they should do something to Texas, in terms of reconfiguring it to make it just a little bit harder to drive. Because the mile and a half, I mean, if we're gonna have like the Roval continue to be on the circuit and not have 2 races at Charlotte, like Texas has got to
It
be
should
better.
be. The other thing is, like, with that specifically, like, is we want to make sure that Texas should be a premier race.
Right.
Like that venue in general, like that's a pretty racetrack. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like it's got all of the trappings to be a premier race on the schedule every year, and somehow it has just devolved into this. Blech. Like so, and just like you said, the car seems to be more where we're looking for that as far as what can actually make this compelling, because the Xfinity race was awesome. I
Right.
could not peel myself away from that race. It wasn't just the ending. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't stop. That was a great race.
I mean, Xfinity's been putting on some really interesting races. I mean, let's go to DEGA, right? Let's talk about how SVG's up there competing for the win. Josh Williams gets up there. The Jesse Love obviously won the race. Haley Deegan survived a wreck, and she was sitting third at the final at the green white checker. She ended up getting hung out to dry, which is just going to be the nature of the beast. Riley Herbst decided, fuck pushing a Ford teammate. Let me just go around her and then not be able to catch Jesse Love. But Jesse saved, I think they said it was like 53 to 56 laps of fuel. Like, so if in case you didn't watch, Jesse Love is this, and not you necessarily, Jeff, but just anybody watching. Jesse Love is this 19-year-old in the 2 car for Richard Childress Racing. I think he was an ARCA champion, but this is, I mean, I think he skipped trucks. I think he's coming straight into NASCAR at into the top 3 series at the Xfinity level. And he's a good raw talent. He qualified, I think, pole or the front row for both Daytona and Atlanta. So they've obviously got something in their program for these super speedways. And in Atlanta, I think he was winning, and when he ran out of fuel, and that's a big thing about. And we're going to talk about the strategies and fuel strategies around that. But here at the race the other day at DEGA, you know, they're going on this long run. They think they're going to make it on regulation, and then there's not one but like 2 green white checkers, and one of the green white checkers, because something happened to one car, they had to extend it a lap. A car ran out of fuel and they had to get pushed back, so they extended another lap. So this guy, he already lost his chance at winning his first race because he ran out of fuel way past the fuel window at DEGA. I mean, 55-ish laps. This is a 2.5 mile track. Like, they don't have that much fuel. And and not only that, everybody around him had about 7 to 10 laps more fuel for that whole window. So, like, we were just like waiting for Jesse Love to run out of fuel. Somehow he didn't, and he maintained the win. It was interesting because of the names that were up front. There was like Brendan Poole was up there, another small guy. So, like, following the Ryan Sieg thing, it's just good to see, especially on those kind of tracks, like the different kind of guys. And somebody made a note on the podcast, or on the broadcast, those guys are not used to being up front at these kind of race tracks. So it's always interesting to see how they race, because they're used to being the pushers in the 10th row or the 5th row. They're not used to being leading a row and what that means, and how do I not accidentally get too far ahead so that I can back. And I wonder if that kind of led to him being able to, Jesse being able to save that fuel or to win that race, considering the fuel thing, is because those guys didn't get stacked up together and push themselves past. There's that inexperience allowed him to kind of push his way out way forward and kind of maintain that lead. And of course, having a hot rod.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, you made a great point about, some folks not being used to getting up front, and that is not the track that you want inexperience to prevail. But I mean, I love Michael McDowell and all. Like, he's always a fun story when he's doing well. But you look at what happened when he was running the front in the Cup race,
Yeah.
and that block he threw down at the end. Ew, dude! Like, you're gonna have to, at some point, you're gonna have to rely on your position, man, because we've seen time and time again. He's not the first one, but you see time and time again the over that particular track. I don't know what it is. I mean, I've never run a race car at Talladega at 190 plus miles an hour and had somebody directly on my tail to make me decide how I'm going to throw a block on it. So I'm not going to judge.
Can't block 4 lanes.
But
Right.
at the same time, like, it's not the first time we've seen someone run in the outside line, running through what would be the dominant pack, seeing someone come in within about a half a car length of them, and then when they get the opportunity to throw the block, it's not just like a subtle move, it is dive bomb to the inside and chaos, right?
Right.
Like we see that at Talladega all too often, and McDowell became another one of those guys that
Hmm.
saw that happen, saw the block, thought he could make it, couldn't squeeze it, and next thing you know, the race he thought he was winning was, he gets dumped to the back.
Right. And I think it comes to a couple things. So one, um, watching the TJ Majors door bumper clear, they were talking about like their struggles and frustrations, and I'll get to that with the car and my thoughts in the past about this car and the package on super speedway racing. But a good example is late in that race, the two lanes are going, and McDowell is on the bottom with Keselowski behind him. And what he's doing is he's getting pushed ahead. And as soon as Reddick was getting close, he would come up and block, take all the air off him, and slow down that line just enough, and then drop back down below to Brad. And then that was going, and that's what was keeping Reddick from being able to overtake the lead. Then that came Chase Elliott and SVG. SVG was leading the line on the outside, and they were booking it. I mean, they were making crazy time. And then Ty Gibbs jumped up there to try to hop in front of that, which makes sense, that happens, but he killed the line. And what they were saying was, you can't hop in front of a moving line like that unless you are moving forward at the time you hop up, right? So if you get a big push bump and then you're going with a lot of momentum, then you can slide up and then they'll slide in and they'll keep going. But if you just kind of like, you're running and they're going and then you just hop up, that's going to, and then that line immediately went back, and Ty Gibbs didn't get pushed to the front like he wanted to. And that's kind of what McDowell looked to be doing to them. As soon as Reddick would get a big push from, I think it was a Toyota behind him. I don't remember if it was Bubba or if this was, I don't know
Well,
who
because
it was.
when Reddick got his win, he snuck in from, I think, like fourth.
It might have been Truex pushing him, but whoever was pushing
Yeah.
Reddick, every time they would try, he would just come up just like Gibbs did to the outside lane. McDowell would hop it, kill that lane, and then before it sucked him with, he would just go back down. And Brad was being very calm and letting that happen. And that's the first thing, is like that strategy of it. But two, McDowell's block is a result of winning being what gets you into playoffs and not being a consistent finisher. Like, you know what I'm saying? In terms of like feeling confident and securing about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, if he was just a situation where like winning didn't guarantee you a playoff spot, but like just being good and have, all right, cool. It sucks. I want to race for the win, but I'm not going to block 4 lanes to try to, like, McDowell has to. He has to try to do something to win. And of course, nobody else wants to do it. And, he doesn't have he only has one teammate. You know what I'm saying? He's got Todd Gillen, who is not there. So like, he's kind of like, I have a Ford behind me, but I also have a Ford who wants to win behind me, who doesn't have a win. If we had like a Logano or somebody who had already won a race, or I mean, I guess there isn't a Ford in the playoffs yet, but if he had a guy that had won a race already behind him, I think McDowell wins that race. But because it's Brad has to make a move, played it perfectly, did a great job of pushing, stayed patient, made the move to the outside, and then cut in, and that should have been Brad Keselowski's win in my mind. But McDowell decided, fuck this, let me throw it. And shout out to Brad. If you look to Texas, Brad had about 10 to 15 lap newer tires than Elliott and Hamlin. He was running them down before the final caution. That kind of led to the green-white checker run-throughs. But Brad had the newest tires, and I was really frustrated, and it sucked because he had these new tires, and he just wasn't firing off on the restarts and getting enough speed because he had the best tires to end that, especially after Hamlin spun. I was like, oh, Jesus, if he can catch the 9, he's out, but it just looked like he wasn't getting up to speed. But that team is extremely close. Now, I want to walk back what I said. So I said earlier in this year on the pod, I said, I think this is the best I've seen super speedway racing. And I'm going to rescind that statement. And
shocker.
In a way, first of all, if you don't know the context of what it could be and what it has been, this is like, what are you talking about? Atlanta's extremely racy. It's fun. Daytona 500 was fun. Even like the end of that race was fun. And they're moving up and they're moving back. And we saw BJ McLeod with an unsponsored ride leading laps this weekend.
Yeah.
If you didn't know that they were running 20 miles an hour slower, then it looks good. people are moving up. There's 3 lanes. And maybe at Atlanta it's really good, and everywhere else it kind of sucks. Maybe at Talladega because handling doesn't matter all that much compared to the other two. It doesn't look as good. But I will say this, because of the fact that they're rolling around at 170 at Talladega, like that's no bueno. It can't be the best package if that's what's occurring. And obviously on all the major podcasts, that's all you're going to hear. They're talking about the fuel saving and in
Yeah.
those situations. And I don't know what the fix is, right? I think the fix would be no stages. Because people are going to save fuel up until whatever, up until the next stage. But if it's just a full race, or make it shorter, like Denny mentioned, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't really need to see 400-500 laps. It's not this race of attrition anymore. Nobody's blowing up motors like it was in the 90s and the 2000s. Let's make Talladega a 3-race weekend, all 3 points, right? Or 2-race weekend, and you run 2 races.
So you got to Pocono it a little bit. You
Dude,
just
I
have
will
them
say
go.
this. I thought that
Yeah.
was fantastic. I loved it.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
back-to-back, the Pocono 300s was one of the greatest things ever.
Yeah.
Because the first race is chaos because it's short and people are trying to rush to get to the front. And then second, everybody learned a shit ton from the setups. So the second race was a lot better because everybody's going into the race and knowing the setup and being able to prep the car and kind of refresh the shitty pit stops, the being a lap down, the whatever scenario, reset, let's go run it back. So it's almost like we got the practice we didn't get. I loved it. If you want to do that for Talladega, go right the fuck ahead.
Well, again, it's almost like heat racing when you do it short way like that. Or look at the old Bud shootouts and the way that they used to do Daytona beforehand when you kind of get guys coming out. When you're running these shorter but on the same track yet still fast type races, it's fun. It makes things interesting. Now, as a proponent of super speedway racing, like, I'm there, but you make a great point because I always, when it comes to Talladega, I always implore people, if you want to see what Talladega could be, go look at Talladega between, like, I'd say 2000 and about 2004. Go and watch, and like, this does unfortunately include the post-Dale death race, but that is also a landmark race in the history of the sport, primarily because this was something that brought up so much of the awareness of how dangerous that track is. And then you saw guys like actually run this race in a, I guess in a less contact format, right? Because you had everybody was a little more on edge. But then at the same time, throughout that particular time span, like, that was, in my opinion, very much Talladega glory days as far as like what that race could be. Because you got guys going, pushing over 200 out on these speedways or out on these straightaways. You have multiple lanes. It's not just double file for 85% of the race. It's not that same line. You had instances where you had 3 lines. You had the ability for people to run in pairs. You had you know what I mean? It wasn't just the exact same full pack race for the entire time. So, I always try to point people in that direction as far as seeing what that's supposed to look like.
And there is strategy. We did see a situation where the Toyotas pulled a little strategy and they ended up doing a really good job at pitting, getting down. They would have been in a fantastic spot. Everybody else was going to have to eventually pit. They would have cycled up to the front. It would have been perfect until, of course, the untimely John Hunter Nemechek crash.
Dude, that one killed me because that if that didn't happen that way, if Nemechek didn't push in the way that he did, that would very likely be something we'd be talking about for the rest of the season.
Right.
It's not just because if that move works out, the idea is sound. It just requires 6+ drivers
just
to make this move. Exactly. And now here's the other thing. One of the things I kept thinking about after that happened is I feel like if this is probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when drivers could actually talk to each other.
Right.
That's a completely different story. Because imagine if all of those guys are able to jump on the radio and kind of like gauge what they're doing. That's an unstoppable move if they do that correctly, because they were going to haul ass up to that front.
No, totally. So I mean, yeah, they were going to be totally fine. They would have again kind of the strategy of that of a move like that, or like the Fords realizing that the Chevys were trying to save fuel at the end of the race. So they were pushing the pace a little bit. Like I get that. There's a game of cat and mouse to be had, just not 20 miles an hour, like slower. Um, but of course, unfortunate wreck, and then of course we've got Eric Jones. It comes out that he has fractured his back, so he's going to miss the Dover race. And they announced that Corey Heim will be in the 43. I want to make a question. So I haven't seen Corey Heim race in Xfinity, much less Cup. I know he is the Legacy Motor Club backup driver, so that makes sense. And he is a young prospect, so it makes sense to get him in the car. Before they announced that, I had kind of listed out a couple ideas of folks. First of all, interesting enough, we had mentioned Truex already, who won the Xfinity race for Dover last year. And that was Ryan Truex in one of his little small bits in the 19. I don't know if he's already committed to the 19 this time around. For the Dover entry list, I didn't check that, but if he wasn't, that was a guy on my list. Eric Almirola is a guy who has raced for Toyota a couple times this year for JGR. I was interested to see if he's a guy who could step in. He's no stranger to the 43 either. I don't think Sheldon Creed's ready to hop up. I think Chandler would have been an interesting look.
Yeah, that would have been one of the ones I would have been very interested to see if this was going to be Chandler's shot.
Right.
Because it feels like he's close.
Right.
It feels like this is it feels like this could be an opportunity for him. But time, to me, that was an interesting call. Because I mean, I've watched him run in the trucks. I've seen no issues. I feel like he should be suitable. It's going to be very interesting to see him, jump up there and actually have an opportunity in a Cup car and see what he can do as per usual. But hey, it's always fun to see somebody else in a different seat.
It's a tricky handling track. So, obviously, at first, I forgot that Jimmy's running the race. I thought, well, shit, who's the king of Dover? But Jimmy Johnson himself, go throw him in the best that Legacy can afford and maybe get some owner points there. But Jimmy's actually going to be running this race in 84, so that's going to be exciting. This is where I'm interested to see what Jimmy's got. We're at a track that, because Texas isn't really a driver skill track these days. Daytona, and then we got to see him in Coda last year and a little bit of Charlotte, which he was quick before he spun out. I'm curious to see how he takes on what is his best track. How does that translate at all to what has been one of his best and where his I think where his final win was. So that'll be exciting. We got a good 3-race schedule. We've got Dover, we got Kansas, and we got Darlington. And I am in the interest of Legacy Motor Club. So Eric Jones's best track is Darlington. And I'm really concerned now because that's probably their best chance to snag a win. They've won recently in the 43 there. He's always quick there. He's got, I think, multiple wins. So that's going to suck really for them if he's not there back. But we're going to have some fun races here. I'm excited for
one of my favorite areas of the schedule this year.
Kansas is, well, if you're a Toyota guy, shit, Kansas is right there. So that's going to be super quick. And I wonder if Jimmy's doing both. I know he's doing a Kansas race this year. And I know he's got the 600, so a lot of Jimmy Johnson here soon. But interesting enough. So Dover, Truex, I'm looking to see these guys. And what I'm saying is I'm looking at the playoffs here. 3 of the 400 guys are in. Suarez is in. And then Reddick, Bell, Hamlin. There's not a Ford. There's not Truex. There's not Bubba. I think this is going to be the Truex and Chastain's best chances to get in here. I'm really excited to see that. Kansas, obviously, that's where we're going to see what Larson can do. If Larson can keep the tire on, that's what happened at Texas. Trying to remember what had happened to Larson. And this will be weird. Didn't they run laps? I think if I'm not mistaken, they were running laps on that tire, and then it came off under caution.
Yeah.
Which is weird. He didn't complain about that. And, of course, Darlington, which out of the 3, Darlington's probably going to be the snooze fest one because that's another one where it's extremely hard to pass in these cars on that It'll be interesting. I don't know if I told you, I'm heading down to Darlington for the
Hey,
Xfinity
that's
race.
awesome.
So, yep, Nate's gonna come down. We're gonna go. He's doing some Xfinity sponsorship stuff. He's either on the truck and in negotiating. I don't know what all he's doing, but he did say he was gonna text Josh Williams and see if I can meet SVG. So I'm preparing my
Dude,
notes. What question can I ask SVG with my 3 minutes of time?
I've got one for you because this is something I wanted to bring up. Did you hear some of the stuff with his radio at DEGA?
Yeah. Didn't they
Just
say?
incredible. They showed him up there and he's like, I need you guys to do better about this. I have no idea what a foot is. And he told them to try and lay things out by the distances of car lengths. And
Yeah.
like, oh God, that was
It's just so
hysterical,
much going
man.
on, and they're like, he's at you by a foot, and he's like, brother, I don't know what
He
that
has
is.
no clue. That right there was the Aussie version of the what the fuck is a kilometer bit that people
Right.
do when it comes to the metric system.
Right.
Like
Listen, I
that's
already
what that was.
if I told you to do that right now, convert like meters to feet, throughout the like right now, like it would be frustrating. You'd be like, oh fuck,
I
do-
just
right,
hope it say yards and hope.
right. Do it
I
at
in 3
100.
feet and that's it.
Yeah, now do it at 190 miles an hour, surrounded by like 20
Nah,
cars, right?
not a chance in hell.
Right. While trying to manage the thing, and yeah, no, absolute chaos. So, speaking of Darlington and audio, well, speaking of audio clips, I was mentioning to you, I'll have it play here on the pod, but there's a hilarious clip. I was watching a 2006 May race at Darlington, had like an hour and some change. I even had the timestamp written down right here. An hour and 41 in, the crew's talking about something about copying Dale Jr. as a human. They were like, well, and he makes a dick joke, like straight, like clear. He's like, well, he goes, well, Dale, there's a lot of things about your anatomy that we could replicate, but there's one thing we can't. And I was like, did I just hear a 2006 dick joke in the middle of this race? So absolute chaos. So I'll show you after, and then I'll throw it on the pod, and so you guys can listen to that real quick. Absolutely hilarious. Going back and watching the old races, I highly recommend it. I'm actually going to be, speaking of SCG, I'm going to be watching this his viewpoint exclusively, the entire road course race in Chicago. I'm going to be watching that. We should probably hop in Discord and do that. And
oh, for sure, yeah.
My goal is, as we build our, as this grows and we build our community and try to find ways to do that, I think it would be cool to find a race a week and just everybody go watch the old one together, and then Discord. That could be fun, and that's one that I definitely want to do. But yeah, just all the little snidbits. Today I was watching the 9/11, the first race after 9/11, and Dale Jr. won that race. It was at Dover, and coincidentally the same year that Dale died, 2001. So obviously a big year in terms of like that sport, big events, and then of course like the post 9/11, immediate post 9/11 patriotic era, and then have a race in Delaware that's kind of closer to that area. It wasn't like we're racing in California. Not that California is not patriotic. Let's not get political. We're talking about 2001 here, okay? Don't lib me up now, but no, but like very close to all of that stuff. What did the third plane crash? Pennsylvania. So it wasn't in Delaware, it was Pennsylvania. But just in that time of area, and there was a nice like Ken Schrader's just running this American flag scheme, and they were doing a little interview with Ken Schrader, and he didn't make a dick joke or anything, but it was just I think they had asked, I think qualified like 13th, and they were like, A, B, multiple choice, Ken, do you want to move forward, stay where you are, or move backwards? And he goes, I think I'll move forward, and just being funny and silly, and he was like, thanks for giving me an easy one. I've been nervous all day, because and it's just interesting to hear how the sport used to be, and definitely interesting coverage. So Dover, excited for that. I mean, again, I think there's a lot to be excited for with this string of races, not just Darlington, but then we got the All-Star race, then we got the 600 where we're going to be going. Obviously mad excited. We've locked in those plans, so that's going to be extremely sick. My question is, who are you most, like, who do you think's right there? Like, Elliott got his win, Reddick got his win, so we got 2 new playoff drivers in our last 3. Look, knowing who drives well at Dover, Kansas, Darlington, Eric Jones would be one of those guys that I would say, man, he could steal one, but who's close? Who do you think is like right there?
Chastain.
Chastain, you think?
Chastain is probably my first pick to go in there. I think it's going to be Chastain or Bubba, but for Dover, I'm not really. I don't know about Bubba. I mean, all eyes are on Kansas for
Bubba,
just
yeah.
about any Toyota driver that's not there.
He's so fast too. Like,
Yeah,
he's so fast
exactly.
at Kansas. Yeah.
This has been one of the better seasons as from a consistent perspective of like week in, week out, people actually have to watch out for the 23 this year. And it's been good. But that's the other thing is Chastain's been very similar. Chastain has been there for a lot of these races. He's been in the mix both at the end of stages and towards the end of races, and he just hasn't quite made his way up yet. So I feel like he's due at some point. I just, I feel like we are that close with him.
Yeah, I agree. Bubba was a name that I'm very close to, and I've already mentioned this driver, but I think Brad is right there too. Phoenix 4th, Bristol 3rd. He's coming off back-to-back second place finishes.
Yeah.
Obviously, Brad Keselowski is not going to be a road course threat in any capacity, but I really think they've got something down. They've got a lot of momentum. I mean, and again, let's talk about the highest he's qualified this year has been 13th. The last 2 races he's qualified 22nd, finished second. In both of his other top 5 finishes, he was 18th to 4th, 17th to 3rd, and then at Richmond, 23rd to 8th. The road course was the road course. Throw that away. Martinsville didn't have the greatest day. The 6th crew has got a lot of potential. And I mean, you think about who's the top performing Ford right now, it's Brad K. I'm not seeing that with Blaney right now. Like Gano, kind of nowhere to be found unless it's at Martinsville with 180 lap tires. So that's who I would say there. I'm not seeing the Chevy that's not named Chastain. Winning one. Bowman is, I don't know what's going on. I mean, he's finished. He didn't finish bad. He finished 5th last week after the crazy wreck. He did have speed at Martinsville, which is frustrating. At practice, they always talk about it's not the fastest lap in Martinsville. It's who has the best 30 lap times, and the 48 was extremely, extremely fast. But he caught up in a wreck at Texas. If I'm not mistaken, it was either Martinsville or Richmond where he was really, really quick, got trapped a lap down because of the pit strategy, and then a caution came out. 8th at Martinsville, and when all the Hendrick cars were obviously juiced with the ruby red. I don't know what was going on, but dude, to finish 8th at a race and be the 4th best finish for your team, that's pretty gnarly. But I don't see Alex. All the Hendrick guys are doing fine. And I'm genuinely concerned about RCR at this point. They are god awful. I don't know what Kyle Busch is doing. I don't know if I can blame Kyle Busch. All I know is that team sucks right now.
I was gonna say, as far as it, in the contrary of what you were initially asking about, who's right on the cusp,
right?
In the opposite, honestly, that's one thing that's getting me is I am surprised because at the start of this season, Busch was fast. In the start of the season, he was running decent, and it was kind of okay, is this going to be it? Because one of the issues that I remember seeing him deal with last year was he'd have a fast car, he'd run halfway decent, and then somewhere down the middle of the race, either the car itself would just completely fall apart, or something would happen with his pit crew, and then the car would fall apart. This year, the car has for the most part, stayed together, but we've seen Kyle fizzle out a little bit, as races going on, and as the season has gone on, we're kind of seeing less and less of the results that we were seeing at the beginning of the year. I hope that he's not fizzling out. Hopefully it's just slow, but yeah, you're right. Generally, RCR is just not running well at all.
Yeah, I'm not seeing Colleague run well. I'm not seeing RCR run well. Right now, as far as Chevy teams are concerned, it goes Hendrick, Trackhouse, and I don't know. You know what I'm saying? There's not much in that department. And then, of course, the Fords are struggling. So Toyota looks extremely good. They're primed. Buescher is obviously always a guy that we got to watch out for. I think he can definitely pop in and win some races. But really, I think the three answering the question that was asked, Chastain, Bubba, Truex, and Keselowski, I think are my guys who I'm going to expect at least two of them to walk away with new playoffs. I mean, of course, we could go to Kansas and Larson just runs away with it, right? Obviously, Byron is extremely quick at these tracks as well. But you mentioned last year the Ross Chastain versus Truex, you know, tracking each other down at Dover. That'll be interesting. And then Darlington's going to be extremely interesting. Joey Logano tends to be quick at Darlington. Eric Jones was a player, but he's, and even when he comes back, right? Like we saw what happened to Bowman last year with his back injury, and how rough these cars are on that kind of thing. So I don't know how that's going to turn out. So that's really what I'm looking for. I'm excited. It's going to be a good part of the package. It's going to be a good early entry into the summer. Again, looking ahead after Charlotte, Worldwide Technology, and Sonoma in Iowa, that actually, and then New Hampshire, we might have a rough June, actually. Now I'm thinking about
I
it.
was going to say, like, you were talking about like a potentially boring set where we are now. That's one
great.
where it's like, damn, man, 3 out of 4 are like,
Well, Sonoma's
could be.
Sonoma's getting repaved,
Yeah.
and I think if SVG's racing at Sonoma, I'll watch the shit out of Sonoma. I'll tell you that right now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Worldwide Technology, whatever. Iowa, if that's good, great. If it sucks, cool. And then New Hampshire, and then Nashville might be, We're not really getting the most out of the cars. But then July, the street race, Pocono, back to
Yeah.
Indy.
July's going to be great.
Right.
July is probably the month I'm looking forward to the most.
So, and I'm also interested this year. I forgot that we have 2 road courses in the playoffs this year. Watkins Glen is now a playoff race. So, very interested to see how that goes. But no, all in all, we're coming off a weird part, and it's part of why I'm glad that we do the podcast the way that we do it. That way we don't have to kind of sit here and just rehash all the same talking points and the frustrations week to week. We had a bad race. We kind of not talk about it all that much.
Well, right, exactly. It doesn't have to be the only subject of conversation, right? At the very least, with this kind of allows it to be like, okay, well, we can spend a little more time on one track or another. And I know for me, maybe our listeners would have something else to say about that. Maybe that's what they prefer. They're like, we prefer you jawing on about the same talking points we heard on the other podcast 2 days ago.
Let's learn some cool stuff,
Right, exactly. Maybe that's what people would prefer, but to be honest, like, I don't know, for me, it's kind of like if I'm a listener, I like the idea of there being a little more pick and choose on some of the more exciting aspects of what happened over the course of the last few weeks. So,
right.
Well, I think that about wraps things up for us this week. Please make sure you check us out on YouTube and Spotify under the name Intentional Wreck. Please like, subscribe, share, and tell all your friends about it. Please hit us up on social media. You can find us on Twitter and TikTok. I do this every week.
Little tic-tac-toe.
I say tic-tac every time on TikTok. God, I sound like such a boomer. You can find us on Twitter and TikTok under the handle IntRecPod. That's at INTWRECKPOD. Find us, follow us, talk racing with us. Yeah, get involved. And if we can actually get a few or more of y'all to actually engage with us, maybe we'll bring the mailbag back and you actually have a chance to get your question out on the show. So please be sure to hit us up. We'll have an email and information on that in the show notes. But we'll see y'all later.
See ya.